Alright guys, today we will be reviewing the Scotland versus Australia game. It was a very good game. I was at the game. It was great to be back. I filled out Murrayfield for the first time in a long time. It was a fantastic atmosphere and great fun. But let's get into this game. So it started a bit iffy. The game overall was a bit scrappy, but in the first minute, Russell had a kick that was charged down and was collected by the Wallabies players. But then the Wallaby player passed it to a Scotland player immediately, giving possession back to Scotland. And then not long after that, like a minute later, Scotland nearly get a really good 50-22, but the Australia fullback manages to keep the ball in just. So it was kind of a bit of a frantic start there. And then not long after that, Wallabies missed the penalty. It should have been a fairly simple penalty for O'Connor, but he pulled it wide to the right. And then on the 11th minute, George Turner had to go off injured, which meant new cap Ashman, I believe he's 21, had to come on and play about 70 minutes of test match rugby against Australia, which is probably not the way you want to introduce someone into international rugby. But I thought he was great throughout the game, but it's unfortunate to see Turner have to go off injured so early on. And then on the 17th minute, Scotland had a pretty good attack in the Australia 22, but they dropped the ball. Who would have thought? And then Australia went up the pitch and put a kick through. Hogg collected it just outside the in-goal area, but he was forced back in by the Australian line and forced to put the ball down, which meant that Australia had an attacking scrum. But Scotland actually managed to win a penalty a couple of phases after that. And it's still 0-0 at this point, 17 minutes in Scotland versus Australia. This is meant to be a game where players are throwing the ball left and right and everyone's flinging balls wide. But it's still 0-0 at 17 minutes. And then on the 21st minute, there's finally a score. Scotland have a line out in the Australia 5 where they put a man up, and then instead of just making the maul or putting it off the top, they actually throw it back down to Grant Gilchrist, who's further in the line out, and they set up a maul through him, and Scotland just barrel over the line through Hamish Watson being the try scorer. There was a bit of controversy that there might have been an obstruction, but it looked like Gilchrist did have the ball still in his hands when they hit the Australian defenders, so the try stood. The conversion was good from Finn Russell, and so that made it 7-0 on about the 21st minute mark. And then in the 30th minute, Australia, from a line out in the Scotland 22, managed to manipulate the defence to get a man free on the opposite wing, who's through it on a try. He's about to score, it's all good, but then is pulled back for a penalty just before he goes in and scores, for taking the player beyond the ruck further back in play, and Scotland get a penalty from that. And so some quite stupid ill discipline from the Australian players. I mean, they didn't score a try there. So that's potentially 7 points that they've missed out on from a really quite stupid decision at a ruck. But then on the 36th minute, Hooper does manage to score a try. However, it was disallowed for foul play from the Australia number 3 on the Scotland number 8. Now, when I was at the game and my adrenaline was flowing and I was being really, really biased as you do at your games, I was like, oh, it's clearly a penalty and a yellow card. But what happened was, at the ruck, the Scotland player who was tackling was still there, and a player came in and kind of hit him in the face, but hit's a strong word for what happened. He kind of brushed him in the face more so with his forearm, and so I understand why they gave a penalty and a yellow card to the Australia number 3, but for me it's a bit light. I'm not going to complain, but if it was the other way around, I'd be absolutely raging that was given as a penalty and a yellow card. It was extremely light. I know why it was given, with a lot of the focus on head contact with players, but I think it was quite light. There was lots of people also saying that Hooper was a double movement. I'm not sure. He did kind of push his leg out, but I'm not really sure it propelled him forward at all. So there's people saying that even if it wasn't a penalty there, he wouldn't have got the try. But I think his try would have been good, and it probably should have stood, and it was quite light. But yeah, tell me what you think about that below. Should that try have stood, or was that a fair yellow card? I think at most it should have been a penalty, if that. So that's Australia with a man in the bin for 10 minutes. But then on the 39th minute, Australia get 3 points from a penalty by O'Connor. It's their first score in the game on the 39th minute, and that's how it stays at halftime. It's 7-3 at halftime. So it's been an interesting first half. You would expect with these two teams to, put the ball through their hands, to maybe had some really nice tries, but it was kind of a defensive game, to be honest, in this first half. Both defenses were doing quite well at stopping the other team from being able to break through and get some tries. But Scotland lead at half-time at 7-3. And on the 44th minute here in the second half, Australia, still down to 14 men, actually scored a try. So it was off the back of a scrum, and where they go a phase, and then you put a pass through to Leota, who had just come out of the scrum, I believe, and it runs a great line between two defending players and completely passes through them and scores the try. The conversion is good, which makes it 10-7 at this point, and 10-0 to Australia during their yellow card period. Normally, I think the average score in a yellow card period is like 7-0 to the team without the yellow card. And it's 10-0 the other way around. So that's actually quite poor from Scotland. They should have been doing a lot better there. Then not long later, on the 47th minute, Scotland have a great break down at the left wing through Sam Johnson, who has Van der Merwe on his left. But he doesn't use him. He decides to go cut inside, and we go through it. He gets tackled, and we go through a couple of phases, and then I think it's Matt Fagerson just drops the ball on the 5-metre line, and Australia get a scrum. So that's 2 times so far in this game, I believe, where Scotland dropped the ball to not score a try. It feels like it's 2011 all over again. On the 53rd minute, Russell puts a great kick, getting a 50-22 for Scotland. That leads to a great strike play, letting Van der Merwe loose down the opposite wing, but Australia managed to tackle him. Scotland get a penalty a couple of phases later and opt for a scrum. They didn't go for the corner, they had to go for the scrum. They've been on top on the scrum pretty much all game. I think Australia maybe got 1 penalty earlier on, but they've been dominating the scrum at that point. But they run a play off of that. They got an advantage from the scrum. It goes out wide. Stuart Hawkes tries to do a loop pass for some reason and miss out a player, and the Australia player intercepts it, but it was an advantage, so they come back for the penalty again, where Scotland opt for another scrum. We're around about the 58th minute at this point, and from that scrum they take 1 phase infield and they go back out, and it ends up in Ewan Ashman's hands, debut boy, right out on the wing, where he scores a beautiful try that any winger would be proud of, where he's pushed over the line, but he isn't in contact. Well, he's pushed over the touchline, but he isn't in contact with the ground and managed to place the ball in the try zone, and the try is scored. However, Finn Russell did miss the conversion, which makes it only a 12-10 lead for Scotland at this point in the game. And that missed penalty comes back to kind of haunt Scotland a wee bit here, where on the 63rd minute, Scotland do give away a penalty in range of James O'Connor, who kicks the ball successfully through the posts, making it 12-13 to Australia. But then, only about 4 minutes after that, around the 67th minute, Scotland get a penalty off the back of a scrum and go for goal, and Russell slots the kick, making it 15-13 to Scotland. And then on the 75th minute, Australia have a maul going really well in Scotland's half. They're making a good amount of ground, and when they go to play the ball, they get through a phase or two or something like that. But Scotland managed to strip the ball, kind of controversially. The assistant referee called a high shot, I believe, on Josh Bayliss, I think it was, who took the ball. But Romain Poix said that he was attacking the ball, and so he let play continue. And from that, Scotland managed to put the ball out wide and make a break down the opposite wing through players like Hogg and Horn. But then he gets tackled sort of near the Australia 22, and they put the ball through the hands, and Russell decides to kick into the corner, and up and under, but it just goes straight dead. And so Australia have a line out just outside their own 22. It's a bit of a missed chance there for Scotland. They should have just kept the ball in hand, I think, for a bit longer. And from that line out, Australia win a penalty, but O'Connor can't find touch. The ball was nowhere near the touchline. You couldn't really see it on the telly when I rewatched it, but I was at the game and we were right in line with that touchline pretty much, and it was about 5 meters in field, and it was nowhere near the touchline. But then Hogg catches it, but then his return is equally as rubbish. He completely shanks it, but he nearly gets a 50-22 from it. It kind of is really low and it rolls along the ground, and the Australia player just manages to collect it before the ball goes out. But yeah, that was a really interesting couple of minutes. But then not long after that, on the 79th minute, Scotland win a penalty, but it's not close enough to go for goal and just see out time, so they decided to kick to the corner. They managed to collect the ball from the line out and see the game out, with the game finishing 15-13 to Scotland, where Hamish Watson was the man of the match. He was probably a deserved man of the match. He didn't do much flashy stuff, but he's probably getting in there and getting in people's way a lot. But yeah, it was a very good game. Not the game I think people expected to see. With teams like Scotland and Australia, you would expect, a 30-32 scoreline instead of a 15-13 scoreline. But it was still a very fun, entertaining game. It was still very open, but teams just weren't able to capitalise on the chances they were creating. But overall, I think Scotland probably did deserve to win that game. They looked on top for most of the game, even though in the stats the stats are somewhat even. I think it was about 53% possession it was to Scotland to 47% to Australia. But if you look at stuff like clean breaks, Scotland had 4 clean breaks to Australia's 2. Scotland made it 338 metres to Australia's 256. It made 87 carries for Scotland to 66 for Australia. Scotland made 103 tackles to Australia's 95 and missed 16, where Australia missed 21. It was a fairly even game, but I think watching it looked like Scotland were kind of in control for most of that game. So yeah, guys, that was the game, 15-13 to Scotland. Tell me what you think about the game down in the comments below. Subscribe if you're new around here and like the video if you enjoyed it. But as always, guys, have a great day. See ya.